Welcome to 'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host Caleb, and today we're asking a loaded question. Does canon really matter? In an age where every franchise is starting a universe, is it a sustainable format? Should the history of a series impact our enjoyment of a single entry? And how should the future of entertainment be handled? Find out the answers to these questions and much more on this week's episode of 'Cause We're Nerds. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are in a new place recording with some different equipment this week, so we probably sound quite a bit different, but do not worry, we will be back in our regular recording area with all of our regular equipment in about a week or two. But we are here in the CNC Power Hour recording studio. That's because we have two guests today. The first one you know and you love, and that is CNC Power Hour's own Chris.
Hey everybody. Caleb, how you been?
I've been doing okay.
Good.
Hasn't been that long since we've seen each other this time.
Yeah, I know. But it's good that you're here. Last time it was digitally, but it's nice to actually see you. Yeah.
And our other guest is a new guest to the show, but hopefully you will come to love him as well. And this is other Chris.
Thank you very much, Caleb, for having me on.
All right, so before we get too far in, we've got two Chris's on the show. We've got to figure this out. So I'm thinking, CNC Power Hour Chris, we call you either CNC Chris or BlizzCon, because that's your nickname.
Yeah, I've been called worse things.
I'm going to go with BlizzCon, because that's what I call him.
Sure, okay, so you're BlizzCon. You are...
Ward.
I am not going to get that right.
Like Grant Ward?
No, just Ward.
Yes, like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Or Boss. I'll call it sometimes Boss Chris. Either one. Hopefully it doesn't matter.
Don't call me Boss Chris. I'm Ward.
You're my boss, like, in my heart.
You're just a boss, Chris. Come on.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, so we are recording this, like, way ahead of time. So we're not going to do any news this week. We are just going to jump right in to our topic, which is, does canon really matter?
I have thoughts and feelings about this.
That's good, because you're on a show about it.
Ever since you asked me, I've formed a lot of thoughts and opinions, and I think they're actually different than when you initially asked me the question about 2 weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
I think I've actually reversed my decision on what I initially thought.
Interesting. Okay, so we probably need to define what canon is for those people that don't know. You had a really good definition, Ward.
And that was, we've only talked about this ad nauseum for 2 weeks, so I'm not even sure
which definition?
Which definition it was.
All right.
I think it's the history and the boundaries that define a universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially its core principles, and it's essentially the history. And the history can't conflict with itself when you're writing new content and material.
Yeah, it's the idea of what has actually happened. So a good example of this is, say, a movie comes out, it's really popular, people love it, and they do spin-off comics, right, that tells the story of what happened after the movie. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, we want to do another movie, but we don't want to mess with everything that happened in the comic, so we're just going to act like that didn't happen. The comic is not canon at that point. The movies, the first movie and the second movie, are what would be considered canon.
Right. You hit nail on the head there, bud.
Thanks. So
that brings in an interesting hierarchy of canonity, right?
Yes, which I'm sure we will get into.
We definitely will.
Because
all of these topics that we're going to be talking about have various hierarchies. Because they're not just one medium, right? Star Wars is comics, Star Wars is books, right? Star Wars
was literally anything that Lucasfilm put their stamp on,
right,
was canon.
Which was a disturbing amount of things.
Yes.
Lots of things.
And which made it very difficult to come up with new things.
Yes. Which is why
probably moments after Disney purchased it, they said, we're getting rid of all of this.
Yeah. Too much baggage, right?
Yeah. So,
good and bad.
There are a lot of examples of canon everywhere. Obviously, a big one, Star Wars. Marvel and DC have their own canons, multiple, actually, depending on the comics or the movies or whatever. And then you have cases where the canon restarts every single time. So, like, James Bond. Whenever there's a new Bond, it's kind of like a new canon, right?
So that's interesting because that hasn't really been defined because there is a consistent character among almost every Bond film after the first couple.
Yeah.
Character and actress, right? M is in over half of the Bond films.
So that's a weird one.
Yeah.
It kind of muddies what canon means.
Right.
And there's lots of others. So I think that I'll just start off. Does canon really matter? I think that canon is not as important as it used to be. Even 10 years ago, the Marvel Cinematic Universe started, right? And I'm primarily, I'm here because this is my show, but also I'm a big Marvel fan. Ward, Chris, is here because he's a big Star Wars fan, and
That's an understatement.
Right. His life is Star Wars.
It's in my DNA.
You should see his wallet.
Oh. You should see everything. It's all Star Wars.
It's all Star Wars.
But that's primarily why you're here, because I thought you'd have great insight on that front with Star Wars and everything. And then other Chris, BlizzCon. Goodness, it's going to be so hard. You're here because you're just all around stuff.
I have approximate knowledge of many things. Yes.
Yeah. So from my standpoint, Marvel comes along, right, and to the movies. 2008 starts with Iron Man, and there is a massive boom of success for them. And part of the big thing is, we've built a universe on the screen in the movies, which hasn't really been done to that level before. And that was really important then. And it's odd for me to say this because we just had Infinity War this summer, but I feel that has started to drift away, and the emphasis is becoming more on single stories versus the canon of the universe. And I feel that's kind of where entertainment as a whole is going, because like you alluded to, it kind of handcuffs you.
Yeah. My initial thought, because of how I've dealt with Star Wars almost my entire life, we had the movies that came out 1977, 80, 83, and there wasn't a whole lot of extended stuff out of that. There were the Han Solo novels. But beginning around 1991, that's when Timothy Zahn wrote Heir to the Empire. They figured out real quick, we can add new Star Wars content. And it went nuts. The entire 90s was basically nothing but populating that entire universe. And I don't know a lot of other pop culture franchises that expanded almost to that sort of extent.
Uh-huh.
And I'm guessing that, like we said, when Disney bought everything, you look at a Wikipedia and it's like a spider web of stuff. And the ability to have characters do new things, it was almost impossible to write anything new around the characters of Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, Han Solo, so forth. And I feel like you are right in that modern day pop culture doesn't need all that external expanded universe stuff. At the end of the day, what they really want are the characters to have core qualities, and that's it.
And that was something I was kind of coming into this conversation, trying to process whether or not canon does matter or not. I think that what you really need, instead of true canon, is core principles and maybe some core history elements to the character that 99% of the time are the same. For example, Spider-Man, Uncle Ben died.
Yep.
That's why he's Spider-Man.
His name is Peter Parker.
Right.
Most of the time.
Most of the time. And he got bit by a spider while on a field trip, and there you go.
Right. And with that framework, you can do
anything.
Yep.
And that's not to say you have to stick to that framework either, because like in the Ultimate Universe, they introduce a different Spider-Man, which works just as well.
Yeah, they introduce... they actually changed the Peter Parker origin slightly in the Ultimate Universe.
Yes.
And they also introduce another Spider-Man by the name of Miles Morales later. But, it's not really just... I guess it is modern-day pop culture, but comics have kind of been ahead of the curve with this, because DC was the first to kind of say, okay, we're getting bogged down with all of our past stories. How do we work with new characters or new directions for old characters. And so in the 60s, they ended up sort of scrapping previous continuity very quietly and moving on with new characters like a new Green Lantern, a new Flash, and even interacting with the past continuity by calling it a different universe. And that's not too confusing, especially for modern day audiences with the resources we have, and we can just Google something.
Right.
Right? But they were doing that, literally 50 years ago. And other continuities have caught up because they've realized, oh, this is just too much work. It's too limiting to keep the same Dragon Ball Z characters' stories straight across movies and manga and anime, right? So whatever medium they're working in, that is its own little continuity. And that's what's important to me when it comes to continuity, is that it has to be clear what framework you're working in. Otherwise, the story won't make sense. So what DC Comics does a lot, and Marvel occasionally does these too, are like one-shot graphic novels.
Right.
Where it is, what if Superman landed in Soviet Russia instead of the U.S., right? And as long as that premise is clearly defined, you can do whatever you want with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be clear that you're either using the ongoing continuity or you're scrapping it.
I think that's an important distinction. Is regardless of if there is or isn't continuity, you have to know which one it is, because that's where it starts to get confusing. It was just kind of in the James Bond realm. Is it canon to this thing? Is it canon to the idea of the character? And I think that's where canon can be helpful, is if you have a single canon, you always know where you are with the character in terms of what actually has happened. Now, it can be confusing. Mm-hmm. And the thing with comics that's always interesting with this is comics, the reason they did it is because they started in the 30s with kind of that, what we consider the canon of DC or Marvel, kind of started around the 30s on through the 60s. And so they have been going for a long, long time. They're probably one of the longest running same canon forms of entertainment we have. Star Wars is another one. It started 70s.
77.
And continued on. But we don't have a lot of examples of franchises that have run long enough for that to be an issue.
I feel like I'm sitting here thinking about a couple of them. The one that's really kind of got me is the new Halloween stuff. I'm sure you know the new Halloween movie comes out in October, and they've more or less said this is a franchise that's been around for 40 years. And they said the first movie, we're good with that.
Forgot about that.
However, Halloween 2 is no longer going to exist, which means Michael Myers and Laurie Strode are no longer brother and sister. What? I mean, when you talk about the core principles, the canon of the story, you're completely like railroading all of that. And where I'm sort of thinking also with Jurassic Park as well. So you can look at Halloween as the first Halloween movie, Halloween 2, or you could pick the first Halloween movie, then 4, 5, and 6, or the original Halloween movie or the new one, Jurassic Park. You could choose Jurassic Park 2 and 3, or we could go the route of Jurassic Park, then Jurassic World, and then the new movie.
Right.
And it's almost like choose your own adventure. Which one do you want to follow today? And that's kind of confusing, I guess.
It's confusing to the general audience that don't keep up with it.
Right.
But sometimes it's not confusing because sometimes those audience members don't know that there were more movies afterwards, right? And that's kind of been a trend, is let's keep the good ones and forget the bad ones for a while. Probably since Superman Returns, because it was a sequel to Superman 2, I think.
Yes.
But not 3 or 4.
I think the problem with that, and what I've been thinking about is, while it's very easy to write those new stories and take them in different directions, one of the things that it could potentially also do is fragment and splinter your fan base over which ones they like.
Right.
Obviously, you're seeing that with Star Wars. You know, you've got the people who are like, Disney, keep making more stuff, which I'm firmly in that camp, even if it is The Last Jedi. However, you have people who are like, Disney has completely ruined Star Wars, and you're not going to get me to see that Solo movie under any condition now. And I feel like that's almost the same sort of thing that's going to end up happening with this Halloween, where it's like, you've completely taken this franchise that I've loved for 4 decades and you've tossed all of it out the window. And it can really get ugly and divisive, particularly on the internet. I follow a lot of Instagram stuff for Star Wars, and it's not really good to have your fans bickering over the direction of story and where characters go.
Well, with a franchise that goes on long enough, right, other creators have to take over. So that is inevitable, right? It's par for the course in comics where, writers can change after 6 to 12 issues. But when it comes to movies, it's usually one person's vision, especially for, a trilogy, right? Or even 2. That's super important. And especially for the time gap between the original trilogy and now, 40 years, right? Almost 39. People get super invested in that. And it really just sort of depends on how much you love the universe that they're playing with, and not necessarily the stories that you're attached to. Because one of the big things with Doctor Who, for example, is that after it went off the air in '89, they published a bunch of novels and audio stories that were almost immediately retconned by the show's revival in 2005. So when the show came back, it didn't keep any of the continuity of anything that had been published outside of the old TV show and the TV movie. People may not have liked the fact that it did that, but a lot of Doctor Who fans still enjoyed the fact that, hey, Doctor Who's finally back on TV. That's what's important. And a lot of fans get hyper-focused these days on the things that they thoroughly enjoyed, that they narrowly define their definition of beauty too much and don't let other things influence that.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about other creators coming in, because this can happen with the same original creators. I mean, Lucas did it when he made the prequels. That was majorly divisive.
Yep.
I think having division is inevitable in any form of entertainment. I mean, it can be a sequel to a movie that people don't like. Alien versus Predator. People don't like that movie. It's probably not made by the same people.
It's because it's not a good movie.
Right. But point being is it can happen with anything, right? And so it's an interesting discussion because, you can always say there's going to be division. Because there is. I don't know where I'm going. I had a thought and it left me.
Good job, Caleb. Thanks.
It's inevitable, right? People will like what they like. People won't like what they don't like. But people get too attached to the things that they do like that they're resistant to the idea of somebody else coming in and bringing new ideas. And that's a problem. Instead of saying, I would have done it this way, people should probably look at this franchise that they've invested a ton of time in and enjoying, right? And say something along the lines of, I may not have liked what they did, but I did like this.
It's interesting you pick Predator because that's my second favorite movie of all time, the original Predator. And over the course of, since that movie came out in '87, you've had Predator 2, it was a pretty terrible movie. You had Alien vs. Predator, which was not a great movie. Alien vs. Predator Requiem, which is like bottom of the barrel. Predators, which was kind of weird and slightly all right. And then we've got the new The Predator movie coming out. And even as a fan of that, I can't tell you what's canon and what's not. However, I think we appreciate if there is somebody who can come on and sort of, I think that's the thing we've been trying to find is recapture the magic of that original movie and somehow do something with a Predator character. And there's canon in there, I bet, somewhere, but the only thing that you really need to adhere to with the Predator is, Earth is their training ground. We drop them off and they basically kill things that carry weapons.
And that's kind of what we were saying is you've got that core part of the character of the movie.
Absolutely.
And they keep making more. And it's not, even though there's Predator 2, you can assume it comes after Predator 1, it's not.
And no one writes anything around that Predator 2 actually ever existed. Even right after the movie came out. there was immediate acknowledgement like, yeah, this wasn't good. We're gonna go ahead and put all the rest of these back in jungles again.
And that I've got a list of things here that I kind of think play into this. And that plays into series that each new season, it's a completely different story. There's lots of examples. American Horror Story is a very popular one. One that I'm a big fan of is Digimon. Digimon's probably a better example of this because the core of what a Digimon is consistent across the entire series. However, each season, except for the first two are an exception, but each season is completely new characters, completely new Digimon, completely new worlds. And it's almost like if we bring it back to the comics example, it's a storyline in a comic, right? And once that's done, you move on to the next storyline. And I kind of think that that's a better way to do canon, right? Canon is important in a single story. It has to be there. If you don't have canon in any single story, you don't have a story, because a story is a series of events followed by a series of other events followed by more events. If you remove the word canon, meaning none of this other stuff actually happened, you literally don't have a story. So in that regard, there has to be canon on at least the most basic level. And so I think what you do is you boil it down and you basically have story arc canon, right? Canon for that particular story arc, and then the next one comes along and it could be whatever, so long as it's adhering to those character traits.
So you're looking for internal consistency whenever it comes to these stories, right? Because as long as the characters make actions that are in line with their past behaviors within the same story, that makes sense.
Yes.
And that's the Predator example again. Almost all of them are identical in that they start in space, they land on Earth, they kill things, and then they blow themselves up at the end.
Right. That's the spirit that's important when it comes to these things.
But yes, and that's what I'm saying, because like in the Predator example, all that is important for that movie is that single movie.
That's it.
Right, not the others.
Not that they tie into any of the others.
Right.
Or that any of the prior characters even existed, for that matter.
Exactly.
Yep.
But at the same time, you can take some of those core ideas and twist them into something new that can also be really interesting. And when you don't have that consistent canon, I think it's a lot easier for the fan base to accept it. Mm-hmm. Like we were talking about Miles Morales earlier. When he was first introduced, he was not popular, right? People were upset because they thought it was just pushing diversity. For those of you that don't know, he is half black, half Hispanic, I think.
Yep.
And they were like, oh, well, they're just trying to get rid of the white people and push diversity. But now people really love that character. And I think that if it wasn't a continuation on from the Peter Parker version and it was just something completely different, people would be more willing to accept it and more willing to accept change.
Well, how about this one? How about you have Han Solo, which people were good with the fact that that's only Harrison Ford that can play Han Solo, and when somebody else plays Han Solo, I ain't good at all. That's no. That's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of that moving forward.
I would agree.
In the movie industry now, we've got long-running franchises holding up the industry versus actors. Like, 10, 15 years ago, it was Tom Cruise, biggest actor in the world. You go see all the Tom Cruise movies. Now it's a new Marvel movie coming out. You go see that. Or it's a new Fast and the Furious movie. It's not so much the actors. And so some of those characters are going to have to be handed off to other actors, or they just go away. And I don't see some of the characters going away.
Yeah, it really depends on the way that the franchise can be maneuvered, and this is different per studio and per property. Doctor Who built in the fact that their actor changes after a couple of years.
Right.
But you can't reasonably do that for Marvel. For example, a Marvel movie, it would be weird for audiences to see somebody that isn't Robert Downey Jr. playing Iron Man.
Yeah,
right?
But I mean, we've got the James Bond example.
We do.
Yep.
So it really depends on precedent, I think, because the first Bond shift was kind of not really well accepted.
Right.
And also, I also had a point and lost it. But I'm going to keep talking. No, I'm not. I had a place to go, and it's gone. It'll come back to me.
That's okay. It's also interesting that we have things where I guess you could call it canon, where the story has continued, but that it's all irrelevant. And an example of this, you're probably not as familiar, Ward, with this, but Pokemon, the anime. It has been running for 18 years or something at this point, 15 years. Almost nothing that happens in that show ever has any consequences. It doesn't matter. You could pick up the show now and watch it just the same as you could 10 years ago. The only thing you would be confused about is who's traveling with him this time, which is kind of similar to Doctor Who. I think Doctor Who has a little bit more of a through line, but every time the Doctor changes, except for maybe the companions around him, for the most part, it's kind of a reset. You could see it as a soft reboot.
Yep.
I know it's not, because there's characters that do return.
Yeah.
But it's like it is a jumping on point, but it's also a way to reset the story without losing everything.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest hang-up for a lot of these properties is for the fans, and also often for the story, they want to include characters that were there before. And you can only do that so much, like with the new Star Wars trilogy, right? It is interesting to have those characters there, but eventually you can view them as holding back where the franchise can go. And so being able to create new properties within that universe is a really important thing for the longevity of that franchise.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't have to center around the one person, and if it does, then people need to accept that either it lives or dies or it changes, right?
Sure.
And that's something that's really, really great with Doctor Who, is that it was just kind of accepted that they change, and it's become a very integral part of the show where every 3 years or so, there's a new actor or actress brought on to play this character that's been going on for 50 years. And while they do bring in old villains, old characters, the fact that not only the Doctor changes, but the production crew changes, lets them do more and more interesting things as the series goes on.
I'm sitting here thinking about this. I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm looking at my list, and I was looking at Final Fantasy, which is a series of games where, for the most part, every single game that comes along is completely different with a few small, tenuous links, like character names or something, that they're not actually related. And I'm starting to wonder, this is opposite of what's actually happening, but is the solution not to have franchises and only to have short stories with characters, and then you let it go and you let it be? Because at that point, you don't have issues like this. You don't have issues with canon. And I don't know if that is the answer. That feels a little too tied down.
Well, to that point, within the last 10 years, what pop culture franchises have been created from scratch, new media, whether it's television or movies, that have blossomed the way that you're thinking, that are way more than just standalone stories or something very simple?
10 years?
Yep.
I don't know 10 years, but Harry Potter.
Well, I was going to say I was going to get to Harry Potter, but that's still going back. That's 90s. That's
Wow.
right.
Yeah.
I think part
It
of
was a
the
long time
issue
ago.
is you need enough time for the franchise to grow, which is why most of these things we're talking about is older than 10 years.
But all right, so pretend 10 years from now, what are we going to say with the franchises that were created in the late 2000s or even this decade that are massive canon worlds and universes?
Well, actually, so like Smallville, which was created in 2001, so it's a bit over your 10-year threshold. But I mean, that was able to be rebooted into the current CW universe, right? They just scrapped all 10 seasons,
10 seasons
of that show. Even though they had built a bunch of characters that currently exist in the new DC universe.
Yeah, even if I ask the question, I'm thinking about what have been the trends in the industry, and it's not to create new things. It's
No.
to take the old stuff and redo it,
Right.
and which makes it really hard for new things to come about and happen.
And it makes it hard for people to jump on if they continue the history of the previous movies or comics or whatever it is.
Or they don't make it clear that they're not continuing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they don't make it clear they are continuing it.
Also true.
And then you end up with things like Cloverfield, and it's like, I don't even know.
Video games. I mean, Halo was 2001. That started.
Gears of War?
Gears of War is all direct sequels. There are no spin-offs, no continuations with different characters.
Not true. They're making that pop game.
You got me.
And the mobile one.
And the mobile one, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Harry Potter, because I think for these worlds and universes that have deep canons, it's rooted out of something that is like deeply and dearly loved within that franchise.
Right.
I think in the Star Wars world, what is completely untouchable, like cannot be altered, is the actual core of what it is episodes 4, 5, and 6. Like, I could theoretically imagine a day where they're like, let's reimagine episodes 1, 2, and 3. Let's redo 7, 8, and 9 20, 30 years from now. But if you tried to touch 4, 5, and 6, people will legitimately lose their minds. And I think with Harry Potter, their canon are the books, are the 7 books. If the fan base is so rabid and in love with that canon, with that story elements themselves, that if they tried to alter or change them, they would lose their minds.
There's a plane going overhead. I don't know if you can hear that.
It doesn't happen that often. Anyway.
Continue.
All right. And thinking about your Marvel and DC, I mean,
There's another one. There's a lot of planes.
I'm doing this in case you want to edit. So in the case of your Marvel and DC, I mean, they were formed out of comic books, but I think the things that's really loved today, if you love Marvel and DC, you love them because of the movies. It's my daughter.
I think for the general populace, that's true.
Yes, and my daughter loves Marvel. She doesn't read the comics. She's barely even ever looked at them, but she loves those movies, by golly. And I think it goes back to your Iron Man thing that, there's going to be a day when Robert Downey Jr. is no longer playing Iron Man, and sort of what happens to that character at that point. Does the studio say, all right, well, we're going to change Robert Downey Jr., let's change all of them. There's a new Captain America, we're going to reset everything. Or can the audience actually deal with the fact that there's a new Tony Stark that's interacting with all these other characters that are consistently playing these other roles?
I think that the answer to that is something that they've been doing in the comics, which has been very controversial, which is handing off the mantle of whatever hero, so in this case, Iron Man, handing that off to a different in-universe character to become Iron Man, right? And in the comics, it's controversial because it's a drawing. They never have to age. In real life, when you have actors, it's a problem because the actors can only portray the characters for so long. And so I think that you have really two options as you pass the three, I guess. Option one is they're just out of all future stories forever. Option two is you pass the mantle, which could be really interesting because now you've got newer heroes trying to follow in the footsteps of older heroes, which we've seen a lot in like comics, but that hasn't really touched movies yet. And then the third option is let the character go away for a while, 5-10 years, bring them back later with a new actor. That way it's not so shell-shocked,
Yeah, or you can revive them from the dead with holograms. Like Peter Cushing in Rogue One.
Not good. Let's not do that.
That worked pretty well.
No, it did not. So I actually think, to your point, that will happen.
Yeah.
In the future. CGI is not to the point where they can do that easily and it be photorealistic. Peter Cushing is a primary example. Some people say Princess Leia at the end of Rogue One is an example as well. I think she actually looks pretty good, personally.
If I take my glasses off, you can't tell.
He's blind without his glasses.
Right.
Huh.
Although, as much as I love Star Wars, and Tarkin is one of my absolute most favorite characters in Star Wars, I don't resent the fact of the CGI stuff, but you know the guy who played him,
Peter Cushing.
No, not Peter Cushing. The guy,
stand-in.
Oh, the stand-in. I gotcha.
stand-in dude, and his name is escaping me at the moment. I would not have loved Rogue One any less if he had just
Done it.
Tarkin as
With a name tag?
when they did Revenge of the Sith, they had Tarkin at the end, and it wasn't Peter Cushing's face on it, and
Right.
didn't keep me from liking the movie.
And you can tell they're moving towards that with things like Solo and Mon Mothma that they've had in the movies. They're realizing it's better to use a different actor or actress for the role than to just CGI it. I think Tarkin is an interesting one because he only appears in one movie. And if he didn't look like that, people, the general audience, probably would not realize who he is.
And this goes back maybe to my thing with don't mess with the core. Don't mess with A New Hope. And if you're going to put Tarkin in there, then by golly, he needs to look like Tarkin.
Right.
Right.
And I think that the core is what we've been saying with those core character traits.
In fact, you could even take that example even to Solo. And if you're going to mess with Han Solo, who's in Episode 4, then by God, it's got to be Harrison Ford, and it needs to look like Harrison Ford, and it can't look like the other dude. And if he does, we're just not going to go.
I've noticed as we're talking, and I've been thinking that the trends we've kind of been setting are the worlds that have issues with canon, where canon actually becomes a problem, are the worlds, the universes, where not only do you have the mainline comic book, movie, whatever, you have splintered stories, right? So for Star Wars, you've got the books, you've got the comics, you've got the video games. We don't really have issues with that when you don't have all those peripheral things. Like we're talking about Harry Potter. It doesn't really have a canon issue because you've got 7 main books, you've got the 8 movies that follow that, and now you've got 2 additional movies that follow on. They are spin-offs, but it's not like they've got those movies plus 2 other movies that are spin-offs coming out plus another line of movies. It's easy to follow if you start at point A and go to point B.
Give it time. Because someone knows Harry Potter, you can mint money under the guise of Harry Potter.
Sure.
And one day J.K. Rowling will no longer be on planet Earth to make new content. So somebody will be making Harry Potter content for a very, very long time.
I think if you have a story that you can start at point A and go to point B and understand everything in it without any peripheral knowledge, I think that's okay. Even if it's a long series. Like if we talk about anime, you've got things like Naruto or Dragon Ball Z that have hundreds of episodes. And they don't have a canon issue because it's one singular thing. You start at the beginning, you go to the end, you figure it out. There isn't so much a beginning or end in comics. You could say the first issue, but then you've got the reboots and things, and you've got other events that come into the characters' lives that affect them.
Issue 0.
Issue 0. Or -1, or -2, Oof. Or 0.5s.
Oof.
Yeah. Annuals, man. Annuals do a lot of these, too.
Yeah, annuals. Which you would not get if you started at the beginning and went to the end, because they're not part of that main through line. I mean, Spider-Man got married in an annual. Yeah. Like, one of the major life-changing things that happened to that character happened in an annual. So if you went from, I don't know what issue it is, issue 525 is before that, and you go to the next one, oh, he's now married. I have no idea how this happened. This is when canon's a problem.
Is it?
I think it is.
So you're saying when you have too many things to keep track of that are considered mainline?
I don't think it is a problem because it didn't keep anyone from buying future Spider-Man books.
Right, because if it's at the time and you're following it, it's not difficult. If you try to go back and understand, I collect Spider-Man comics.
I know you do.
I have over 1,500 Spider-Man comics. There are more different Spider-Man titles than almost anything else. Maybe not X-Men, but anything else. Just about Spider-Man. To try to chronologically give you his history is impossible. There are so many things that come into it that affect him from all the different series. You just would not be able to do it.
And that's interesting because a lot of those series were published simultaneously.
Yeah, like they had, I think at most they had 3 issues, or three titles going at the same time.
So is that even canon at that point?
Yes, it is canon. However, Some of those issues fall into the it doesn't matter canon because something happens, but it doesn't affect things. But some of them are, like in the 90s, they really pushed crossover events in those titles. So, like, a storyline would start in Amazing Spider-Man, it would jump over to just regular Spider-Man, and then it would go to Web of Spider-Man. But if you just went from that first Amazing to the next one, you would get no resolution to the story.
Yeah, I think the answer, does canon really matter? The answer is no. Honestly, because the all of these things have to make, at the end of the day, it's a business. They have to make money, and people have to want to spend their money on it. And for the general populace, the 99%, they could care less that they're of the 500-600 bazillion issues of Spider-Man they are, whether or not they all add up and match up together. And I'm not hating, just facting a bit. It's not going to keep somebody from walking into a comic book store and just randomly starting with issue 712 and picking up from there and not caring what happened the other 711 issues.
No, you're right. But when it becomes a problem is if that continues to happen, then it becomes a barrier of entry for new people. Because let's say you walked into a comic book store in the 90s, you pick up Amazing Spider-Man, you're like, oh, this is great. You read 3 issues, you're on the 4th one, it starts a storyline, you go to the 5th one, storyline drops. Mm-hmm. Now you're upset because you have no idea what happened.
I don't know.
It's not clear.
I think in 2018, the consumer's mindset is one of immediacy and having to go and collect all of them and figure out how the line goes. I don't think the modern brain works like that. I think they would much rather be entertained for 20 minutes and then we're on to the next thing.
I agree, except for those small storylines. It would be like walking into a movie and it's stopping halfway through.
Where it's problematic is for people like me and you that like to obsess on these things.
No, I'm not even saying obsessing about it. I'm just saying from a logical standpoint, if you read a book that ended on a cliffhanger and the sequel never came out and you enjoyed the book, you would be upset, right? I mean, it happens a lot. Right?
Right. Or the sequel came out and doesn't talk about the cliffhanger at all.
Right. Or movies. I mean,
right.
Imagine, you Star Wars guy, right?
Yeah.
Imagine The Empire Strikes Back happens. Jedi never comes out. There's no other Star Wars stuff, ever. You have so many storylines that are never resolved.
It's all good because I don't really care for The Empire Strikes Back.
Well, okay, so what about, it starts with A New Hope and nothing happens until The Last Jedi comes out, right? How would you feel if the franchise jumped from A New Hope to The Last Jedi?
See, I think that's an easy jump, actually.
Yeah, actually, that actually is a bad example, because I can see that jump.
I should have probably prefaced by saying, while I'm the Star Wars guy, what I really am is the Star Wars A New Hope guy.
Yeah.
And that for Star Wars, for me, is singularly that one movie.
Sure.
I don't need any other parts of the Star Wars universe outside of that movie. So if it was its own standalone thing, I'm good. I really am. But I could see how that would be frustrating for everyone else.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. If Star Wars just was 2 movies and it ended with,
unresolved cliffhangers.
Luke no longer has a hand and just found out Darth Vader's his dad.
Do we do spoiler warnings for 40-year-old movies?
No.
Okay.
Fill in the blank.
Yeah. And it's interesting with Star Wars, too, because they did wipe everything clean. And they're doing something interesting with the new canon, which is going to eventually end up with the same issue that they had before, where there's too much. But they're introducing characters into it that were in the old canon, which is kind of a solution to your issue of we want to bring back old characters. The example I'm thinking of is Thrawn. Right? So they brought him back in a book a year or 2 ago. I just started the audiobook for the sequel. You, knowing Thrawn, are a little upset that he doesn't appear in the same circumstances. Me, never having read the old books, I think they're fantastic.
That was funny, because Thrawn, to me, he comes after Return of the Jedi, and he's like, I started listening to Thrawn. And I was like, oh yeah? Was he upset about the Death Star 2 being destroyed? And Caleb's like, it takes place before A New Hope. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What?
But
that makes no sense.
But they did it was Timothy Zahn, right? That
yes.
brought him back.
Yep.
Same author.
And I think that if you do it that way, and if there is a general trend of one story ends, we get the next iteration of it, I think that becomes easier. Because you're expecting them to bring characters in a different way.
in the Star Wars is interesting because there's extended characters that we just really, really, really love, like a Darth Revan. And that's how you end up with an upset fan base when you say, well, Revan no longer existed. Like, we kind of got to call a timeout here because you can't get rid of him. Yeah. And I'd say to some degree, Thrawn was a well-loved character. Mara Jade, and probably I even like Darth Bane a lot. Yeah. And I'm going to bet that probably those really well-loved extended universe characters will eventually find their way back in to Star Wars some one way or another.
And Star Wars is also interesting because while they did reboot it in a sense, they did something very, I think, ingenious. And I don't listen to a bunch of Star Wars stuff, especially not when that happened, so I don't know if people have talked about this. But they didn't just say this doesn't happen. They put it under a banner called Legends, which implies it could have happened. It's a legend. Legends are things that could have happened or might not have happened. But until it's been contradicted officially, if you want to, you can think of it as having happened, which I think is kind of a happy medium between just erasing it all and continuing on.
Yeah, you're right. I know when it comes to extended universe, I'm not like, ooh, I know all of it. But I know Star Wars people, and I know that when you have trivia nights, there's people who have accumulated. They have a better understanding of the Star Wars universe than the actual universe they're living in.
Right, right.
And to have someone come and tell you all that stuff, that information and knowledge that you've gathered is now, I'm going to do worthless in air quotes. That can be really upsetting as a fan. And so probably the nice concession, like you said, is to call it Legends. It may have happened. And maybe one day we'll write some stories and get some of this stuff back in there. Pretty upsetting, actually. It is. There's, as the Star Wars lover in me, there's just stuff that I really, really liked, and I don't like the fact that the Old Republic and it didn't happen. Like, come on, man.
But to my point, I'll let you go in a second. It shouldn't matter if that story is part of a canon, because if you enjoy the story is standalone, it should still be enjoyable, regardless of if it's connected.
Where you really potentially could have problems is if you replace Knights of the Old Republic with something else and it's not good.
It's inferior.
Yeah.
Ooh, I agree with that.
Ooh.
That is definitely a problem. I think a lot of the core of what you were talking about, Boss Chris, is
Ward,
Boss Chris Ward, is that a lot of people let their fandom define themselves instead of it just being a thing that they enjoy, right? So their identity is wrapped up in all the time that they've invested.
Dude,
in that.
You're talking to the wrong guy.
I know, but sometimes that leads to all sorts of problems, because that's where a lot of the toxicity comes from, is because people can take these changes personally.
Yeah.
And that, while Disney did its best to navigate that, specifically with Star Wars, like, that is a problem with all sorts of media. And that's just a general problem with fandoms these days. And that could definitely be a whole other topic. So I don't want to talk about it right now.
And you kind of also just alluded to it and said replacing your canon with something inferior. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say whatever extended universe Star Wars had after Return of the Jedi, I would say that the people who really love Star Wars says that Disney replaced the extended universe with far inferior content.
Yeah, and that's a matter of opinion, so there's no true or false to that either way. But I think, I don't have a thought. There's too many thoughts.
I don't have one, but
that was too controversial. that hot topic was too controversial because we're nerds.
Gotta hedge this a little bit, because I am a big fan of the new trilogy. It's only 2 movies so far.
Spin-offs.
Yes. Okay.
4 movies.
4 movies.
I'm a big fan of seeing them in the movie theater and not watching them on DVD.
That's fair.
Which, to your point, you wanted 2 hours of entertainment. You got it. Now you don't care.
I like Solo and Rogue One.
Yeah. I mean, they are doing very interesting things with the universe, they may not be executing it well, but I can't honestly say that a lot of the post-Return of the Jedi novels executed it well either.
I would agree as well. That's why I didn't read them.
Fair.
Fair.
I read a lot of pre Phantom Menace stuff. That was where I thoroughly enjoyed it because like Phantom Menace came out when I was 6, and 99 I was 7.
Wow. Should I show you my dirty secret? Of all the Star Wars films, first one's A New Hope. What's number 2?
Phantom Menace.
Yeah, no, that's entirely fair.
Man, I love that movie. It's wizard.
It's so wizard, eh?
It's so wizard.
This is
I'm the same way. Whereas the Darth Bane trilogy, that is Star Wars storytelling done at its best.
Right.
And they got rid of it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, the Old Republic, right? That is a core singular experience that you can still sit down and play through. And whether or not it exists shouldn't have an impact on that experience, to me. Because tons of people put a lot of work into those 2 games. 3 games, I guess, if you count the online one.
We don't.
You don't.
Yeah. There's a lot of story in that.
Yeah.
Just tons. Too much time.
See?
But it's still worth it to experience that. And you should be able to detach yourself from the emotion of, oh, this doesn't matter, why would I pay attention to it? Because it is an example of good storytelling in your universe, right?
Yeah, if the reason you're not into it is because it doesn't affect anything else, you are enjoying things for the wrong reason. Mm-hmm. You're enjoying things just to get to the next thing, which is not how storytelling is supposed to work at all. You're supposed to enjoy it for the story, for the content.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's what creators want whenever they come on and they take on these projects.
Right.
Especially in comics, because comics are ephemeral when it comes to canon.
Yep.
And if I want to influence this character for a little while, I will do that. And I will be happy with what I did. And whoever comes on can do whatever else they want.
Because they might change it and undo everything.
Yeah, they might keep Jane Foster, or they might get rid of Jane Foster being Thor.
Right. Or any of the others.
All
right, so we're getting about to time. I did want to make one little point. I think I've already said this. But we talking about the Star Wars stuff and Thrawn being introduced. That's an interesting one because people can go either ways. But I think that idea is exciting. And I've seen that also in the Dragon Ball Z world. Because the anime is based off the manga. So technically the manga is the canon. But when that show was coming out, they made lots and lots of movies, which are not part of that canon. Now they are making new movies, which are part of the canon, because the Dragon Ball Super anime has carried on from the manga, right? It is now the official canon. And what they're doing in this new movie that comes out in December in Japan and in January here is they are bringing in a character that was in one of those movies, character's name is Broly, and bring him into the canon, kind of reimagined a bit. And that's sort of like the Thrawn thing. And a lot of fans are very excited about this because not only are you bringing in a fan favorite character, but you also are kind of refreshing him, giving him a new outlook. And I think that, as I've said many times, when you start something over and you do that, that's exciting. It's exciting to see what twist they're going to put on the character this time.
I agree.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's going to be interesting. And that's actually something that we haven't really talked about is the anime angle, which you and I kind of have a non-zero amount of experience with. I don't know how much anime
Ward has just
done.
Entered the world thanks to our anime episode.
Okay, good.
Very good.
Good.
Little plug there because we're nerds.
That's right. Please go check that out. You'll love it.
If you're interested in getting into anime, listen to the anime episode.
It's episode number
30.
I'm gonna list from 20 to
30. Is it 20 or 29?
I'm gonna list from 20 to 30, and you can just cut in whichever one's correct.
Oh no, I'm not gonna do that. That's too much work.
So,
be sure to listen to episode number 28.
29.
28.
I kind of want to do that now. Just automated phone recording numbers. Anyway, so this happens in anime all the time, and as far as I know, not a lot of people care Because Ghost in the Shell, for example, was first a manga and then a hugely successful movie.
Incredibly famous animated movie.
Yeah. And then a TV show, and then another movie, and then movies from the TV show.
Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff.
And then prequels that could be for both.
Yeah. And then they made the live-action movie, which most people don't like.
We don't talk about it.
I didn't mind it. It was okay.
I didn't see it.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not gonna.
I saw it for free, so that could affect my outlook.
That's understandable. But I mean, even super famous shows like Full Metal Alchemist,
They got Brotherhood.
It got Brotherhood, which if you're not familiar, the original show ran for 52 episodes and wrapped up the story in its own way, but it branched off from the manga. So a couple of years later, they decided, hey, this show is still successful enough. We're just going to do it all over again from the beginning.
But follow the manga exactly.
Yep, and we got 56 episodes. But in those episodes were references to stories that you only saw in the first iteration of the show.
Sure.
Which, it was an interesting way to do it, but not a lot of people had problems with it because they just kind of gloss over it or give you a quick summary about it.
But to some of the things we've said earlier, anime typically is a lot shorter than things that have spanned 40 years.
That's true.
There's not many anime that have lived for 40 years. Astro Boy, Gundam.
Which Gundam is built to just change its storyline. There is a mainline universe that does have its own history, but where Gundam really shines is when it scraps that.
Well, there are stories set within that you don't really have to know anything.
That's true.
You do realize that Does Canon Really Matter could actually be its own podcast, and every week your episode is based around a franchise.
I love it.
That would be awesome. I can only handle one of these. We'll get much work.
One and a half of these.
We'll get to work on.
Right, one and a half.
At the end of I think in listening to this conversation today and being a part of it, and I thank you for having me on here.
Oh, yeah.
For me personally, I think to answer the question, does canon really matter? ... In 2018, unfortunately, I think the answer for me is no. But going back to what we've said, I think that what is important are core story elements. That without that, you really are kind of probably not going down the correct path. But that's, at the end of the day, when we're making a Halloween movie, what do we want? There'd be a dude named Michael Myers who wears a white mask and he kills people with a knife or chases them with a knife. Mm-hmm. Anything, if you don't have that, then it's probably not a Halloween movie. But
right.
As long as we have those core elements, we're good.
Yeah. Without those core elements, why even bother working within that universe?
Harry Potter. He's basically a boy wizard and he goes to Hogwarts.
And I would agree with everything you said, Ward, with the extra caveat that I think you can have, like I said, those stories that are long running if they are self-contained. Dragon Ball Z, you start at the beginning, you go to episode 257 or whatever. It's fine.
And it's fun to be a nerd that loves that sort of level of detail in the history of things, but
because it can be rewarding. Because
and it's a lot of fun.
Creators will throw you a bone. Like there are characters from Doctor Who or references from Doctor Who that go back to the first season or whatever, where they reference a single line that, if you've been paying attention, you know that's fun. That's for you because you're dedicated, and that's the stuff that I like to look out for. It's not necessarily, oh, this character shows up, but it's like, you paid attention, so here's an Easter egg for you, right?
Right. All right, guys. Any closing remarks?
I'm good.
Internal consistency is what matters.
All right.
Canon, you can do whatever you want with, as long as it's internally consistent.
Yeah. After they trash my Star Wars world, I'm good. I'm open to anything.
All right, awesome. So that brings that conversation to a close. I like that a lot. That was good, guys.
That was good, Caleb.
Thanks.
You were like the MVP of that conversation.
So now we are going into our new segment, What You Been Up To, which, of course, we talk about what we've been up to. Ward, you might be starting to work on a theme for this. If it's done, you probably just heard it. If not, you didn't.
Is it the Magic the Gathering thing we were doing earlier?
No, it's not Magic the Gathering. The thing that I've been doing for about the last, I'd say at least the last 4 or 5 months, is the backwards compatibility Star Wars games on the Xbox One. Oh, yeah. So far, we've got original Battlefront 2. I've completed Knights of the Old Republic, and I'm probably going to finish Knights of the Old Republic 2 today.
Wow.
And then we're going to go ahead and get Republic Commando would be the next one. And it is magical.
Are you bringing those to cabin?
Yes. I haven't really played a modern game in almost a half a year. I'm just...
Going on a nostalgia trip.
Basically, the Xbox One has become my virtual Star Wars vintage console.
Although, to be fair, you're not really a fan of modern games, for the most part.
I am. Sure.
Yeah, you're not really.
I've got Halo 5.
2.
I'm right. I was looking at the case upside down.
I'm down with Overwatch, Fortnite. No. I mean, yeah, I like to play. I like to find new things, but, I mean, let's be honest. I've been playing the original Battlefront 2 since the day it came out, November 1st, 2005. And I play it a lot.
Yeah.
And Knights of the Old Republic, the original one, I think I've done 8 or 9 playthroughs. And Knights of the Old Republic 2, I think this is my 5th playthrough on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for at least KOTOR, I mean, it talks to the breadth of that game and how good it is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, every playthrough is at least 40 hours. And what I've really enjoyed this last playthrough is doing stuff that I've never done before. I'm playing with different characters. Baldur, I've never had him become a Jedi on me. And I feel like every time I play it, particularly KOTOR 2, the goal is to see how powerful I can get my lightsaber. And it's basically statting that thing out with the right crystal combination. Mm-hmm. And it's so much fun. And particularly because I haven't played it, it did not run stably on the 360. So I haven't played it in over a decade. And because it's been so long, I'm doing stuff like, oh my gosh, I can't remember I did this. This was great. And so it's almost like re-experiencing the game for the first time.
That's fantastic. Are you playing The Force Unleashed as well?
Now, there's a game I don't like.
Interesting.
Because, as I said about the Force Unleashed helps you realize how much garbage there is in the Star Wars world. Like, every hallway has containers, and every planet has piles of boxes. And
yep.
I'm more of a tidy Star Wars world. There's not so much stuff to throw around.
So you like the prequels?
I do like the prequels. I mean, I'd like to think I have an open mind when it comes to Star Wars gaming, but those four, I mean, they're
classics.
They're top notch. Star Wars gaming doesn't get much better than that. And I mean, we could go on for days about what I think about the new Battlefront, and it's just the new Battlefronts are an absolute shell of a game compared to the original Battlefront 2. Original Battlefront 2 is. In fact, I was on the way over here. I was thinking, there's this thing. I'm going to play this game with y'all real quick. Sorry to hijack your podcast. You might edit this out. But I like to ask this question that you're on a boat. So you're on the boat, and the boat happens to have every video game that's ever been produced. And with the game comes the console as well. Well, unfortunately, the boat starts sinking. And you have just enough time to grab the console and one game that will be solar powered. And you're going to be on a deserted island for the rest of your life. And you can only play this game until you pass away on said deserted island. What game would that be? And while I let you think, I will say mine is Battlefront 2.
Okay.
Easily, hands down.
That's fair. I have a deep love for Persona 3 or Persona 5 because the characters, the story, I can thoroughly sit down and enjoy and make a bunch of really interesting decisions. And also kind of never get bored with them.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. But also World of Warcraft, so I can just chat someone for help.
You only get to pick one. I mean, pick right.
Or World of Warcraft, so I can chat someone to come get me off this freaking island.
Right. That's a hard one for me. Whatever game I pick is not going to be story-based. Because after I play through that once or twice, I'm going to be very, very bored of it. It's going to be something like a platformer, like an old Mario, or like Portal or something. I don't really know the specific game, though.
And that's one of the reasons I picked Battlefront 2 as well. While there is story mode loosely.
Sure.
It's the kind of game where if you're like, I'm going to play, I got 15 minutes. Well, that's good because that means I can get it Death Star, Mustafar, and Mos Eisley. Or if I'm going to be like, I'm going to play all the maps I've got all day long. It's the best.
Yeah.
That's fair.
All right. BlizzCon, what you been up to?
So, I have been working through a couple of podcasts recently now that the Twitch Doctor Who stream is done and I can actually...
Because we're nerds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? All of them.
All of them.
Marathon.
I'm caught up. Of course I'm caught up. I had to listen to myself a couple of weeks ago. Of course I had to be caught up. But Alice Isn't Dead from the creators of Welcome to Night Vale.
I definitely thought that you just spoiled something.
No.
I was
It's
like,
the name
what
of,
just happened?
It's the name of a podcast. I can't tell you whether or not the name is a spoiler, but Alice Isn't Dead. It's almost wrapping up, and so the story, which there's 3 seasons of it. I think each season is like 10 episodes, 10 half-hour episodes. If you like short-form storytelling, this is awesome. It's a great podcast. The other podcast I've been listening to is Happy Star Wars, where Matthew McCurley, who I have a deep love for dating back like 10 years because he used to write for WoW Insider back in the day, back when it was WoW.com. I played a lot of World of Warcraft back then. Wow. And it's him just sort of drinking tea and discussing all of the things he likes about Star Wars. And
It is happy.
yeah, it is just it
Sounds like your kind of
Happy
podcast.
Star Wars.
I got to write that down.
And it's fantastic. And I actually I'm glad that I found it because this guy fell off my radar a couple of years ago when he left WoW Insider because he went to go work for Riot Games, who does the League of Legends.
Oh, yeah.
And now he came across he was talking to a big person in the Magic community about Star Wars, and he's like, "You should just check out this podcast I do called Happy Star Wars." I'm like, "Nice cross promotion."
28.
Family friendly.
Family friendly.
What's the timestamp?
I got my timestamp.
This timestamp is I can't see this timestamp. It's fine. Does it feel like a duck quack or something? Are you just kind of?
I don't know. It
Gonna
just
silence
depends.
us.
Depends on
I
how
can make all,
easy it is.
I can
It's a
make all
sl-
kinds
it's a
of
slide
noises that
whistle?
you could use. 28.
Okay, here, just get really close to your mic and say that.
28. 29.
And I'm going to leave that in, too.
This whole post censorship conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's fair.
It's good.
It's a good stinger. So I was like, oh hey, good job, piggybacking off of this guy's Twitter conversation, and then I realized who it was, and I was like, oh, now I have to check this out because I love the person involved, and he's just super positive about things when it comes to anything that he enjoys, but in particular Star Wars. So if you like Star Wars, definitely go check it out. It's called Happy Star Wars.
That's awesome. So the first one you talked about, is that like a radio show style podcast?
So Alice Isn't Dead. It follows this girl named Keisha who is searching for her wife. Her wife went missing, just mysteriously disappeared one day. And she, after a couple of years, she saw her wife on the news perfectly alive and well on the other side of the country. So she gets a trucking job to follow the trail of her wife across the country, and she runs into weird horror concepts that come out of the space in America because this country is huge, right?
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of empty spaces, a lot of dark highways, long stretches, right? And so there's interesting, unique folklore to this podcast that they build into a great, gripping story.
Is it like someone reading a book, or is it acted? How is it actually presented?
So it is presented as Keisha, who's voiced by Jessica Nicole, talking into her CB radio.
Oh, okay.
So it follows her just musing as she drives.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
It's really, really cool. The only problem I had with it is one episode in season 2 had like a car crash sound effect while I was driving. Like, and I kind of, like I was in the Walmart parking lot and I was going 2 miles an hour and I freaked out because I heard just, tires screeching and, metal crashing. But that should give you a hint of like how gripping this podcast can be.
Funny story. My brother, who was on the show 2 weeks ago, he listens to the show, and he was driving and said we almost made him wreck because he was crying and laughing so hard that he almost ran into another car.
Oh no.
So what have I been up to?
Way to ask yourself that, Caleb. What have you been up to?
What have you been up to?
Well, Chris, when I really think about what I have been up to, it's not much, actually. I haven't been doing too many new things. I've kind of been catching up on old things I've done or have been doing. A couple weeks ago, I talked about, what's it called? Fate's Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works. I'm continuing that, which is good. I've been working on first ever painting miniatures for a game I have. That's been going good. But the one thing I did this week that was new was I watched a movie called Digimon Adventure Tri Reunion. As I mentioned earlier, Digimon, I'm a big fan of. I watched it growing up. Last year, I went back and watched the first 2 seasons in their entirety. And yes, it is better than Pokemon. We will probably have a podcast episode about that at some point. Fight me.
Don't at me.
No, you can at me. But, so basically, the first series happened with a bunch of characters. The second season came along. The original characters were still in it some, but the focus was on a different group of characters. Digimon Adventure Tri is picking up that story, like 5 years later, right? They're in high school now. And as the title of the movie alludes to, Reunion, they're kind of coming back together for the first time in a while. It's part of a series that they did starting 2 years ago. There's 6 movies. This is the first one. It was okay. I was hoping for better. Hopefully the next one's better. But if you're into Digimon, check it out. You'll probably like it. It is a nostalgia trip. The Digivolving sequences should have been better.
I have heard a lot of good things about this. I know a couple of friends of mine were really excited when these started coming out.
Yeah, and they announced a new series that they're doing. There's not really much information out about it, but it's set like another 2 or 3 years down the road. The weird thing with Tri is the character designs are not, like, they're not super similar to the original designs. Mm-hmm. It's a little off-putting at times, even though most of the original voice actors came back, which is phenomenal, because they haven't done it in 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
The new one that they're doing, the character designs look much more in line with the original ones, which I'm going to go ahead and say I'll probably appreciate that more, but we'll see. And that's all I've been up to.
Cool.
That's been a lot.
I guess.
Yeah, that was at least, an hour and a half, 2 hours?
That's a lot of free time.
You have so much free time.
Not as much as I want, let me tell you. All right, so that brings us to a close. Chris, BlizzCon, and Ward, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
We should do this again. If the audio quality comes out okay, we might come down here and do something like this again, maybe a live stream or something.
Plot twist, we've been streaming this whole time.
What?
Not really.
Okay, good. I was actually sitting here thinking about that. I was like, what if he just was streaming this?
I was going to ask him.
No.
I could have. The button's right here. I could have done it, but I respect you guys enough.
What do you think we were going to do? This is family friendly.
Man, I was picking my nose earlier.
We're not friendly family on our stream.
Oh yeah, no, he is.
We're worse than sailors. There's so many.
It's really funny, actually, but we don't want to anger any parents while they're listening to our show in the car. Right. You can't really watch Twitch live in the car easily.
If you are,
you probably don't.
Yeah,
don't.
Yeah,
we're not.
You're in the state of Georgia.
I appreciate your dedication, but watching our stream while you're driving is not worth it.
No. It's kind of like listening to our podcasts while driving, almost wrecking. Maybe don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Anyway, all right, guys. Well, you know who would do something like that?
Taylor Poole.
Taylor Poole, that's right. Oh, goodness, it's so funny. He did our opening music. He is working on some new music for us that will, I promise, it will come eventually. We keep talking about this, probably for the past 2 months or so. It's all Zach's fault, really.
I've been really hyped about this. I can't wait for it to...
Don't be hyped. Hopefully it's okay.
It's not going to be the new #1 Billboard chart.
Probably not. It's pretty short. But Taylor Poole's awesome. He does great work. Please check him out at TaylorPooleMusic.com. That's TaylorPoole music.com. And BlizzCon, would you like to plug our... No, not BlizzCon. Other Chris, do you know what our website is?
CauseWe'reNerds.com.
That's right. Please check it out. We have finally launched our brand new website. It is amazing. You can stream all of the episodes on it. All of our social stuff is on there. You can drop us a line. Please go check it out. I spent way too many hours on it. It's pretty great.
Remember, that's Cuz, C-U-Z.
That's right, C-U-Z. W-E-R-E-N-E.
If you are going to Cause We're Nerds,
RDS.
you're going to the wrong place.
Yeah.
That's our political activism group. You don't want to go there.
It's headed up by BlizzCon.
Yeah.
And then BlizzCon, tell us about your show.
So you can find me on the CNC Power Hour, which we stream Magic and video games. Magic every Sunday, video games during the week. Usually Saturday nights, but occasionally I get to hop on whenever I have free time. That is at twitch.tv/C, the letter N, C, Power Hour. Definitely come check us out. We've been having a lot of fun. We just celebrated our 1 year anniversary. I didn't think we'd make it.
Congratulations.
Happy anniversry, buddy.
Thank you. I didn't think we'd make it this long.
We've still
I would have
got
brought
like
flowers in a
5 months.
bottle of wine or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay. You missed it. It's fine. I'm not mad.
Okay.
Passive aggressive much?
Yeah, sorry, that came through really, really well on camera, but it probably didn't come through great on audio. Just so you guys know, I am really mad.
And with that, we will see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds. Stay up to date with all the nerdy news and podcast drops by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also leave us comments and feedback at cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. And as always, if you enjoy this podcast, we would love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Next week, we'll dive into a brand new topic. What will it be? Find out next week on 'Cause We're Nerds. Stay nerdy.
We're fine. Everything's okay.
Just gotta
All the
keep
racial
telling
slurs
myself
and
we're having a
everything. we're safe.
conversation. That's all we're doing. It's a shame because I was going to use my the Columbia Broadcasting voice the entire time. Thanks, Caleb, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh no, I've made a mistake.
I believe Canon really does matter.
I'm very glad that I recorded
That opinion is more annoying than the voice.
That's my Ron Trzcinski, the original Mattress Factory voice.
All right, you ready?